Welcome to the Resilient Performance Podcast. I'm your host, Doug Kachijian, and today I'm joined by John Baker. John is a former Major League Baseball player that has played for the Marlins, Padres, and Cubs. He also spent time in the minor league organizations of the Athletics, Dodgers, and Mariners. John's baseball career has taken him across the country and overseas. In the name of baseball, he has spent time in Holland, Belgium, Haiti, the Dominican Republic, Iraq, and Kuwait. After attending Salle High School in Concord, California, John was a walk-on at Cal in 2000. He later earned a scholarship for the 2002 season. He was drafted by the Oakland Athletics in the fourth round of the 2002 Major League Baseball draft and made it to the major leagues in 2008 with the Florida Marlins. Besides writing about and discussing baseball, John enjoys reading, playing the guitar, exercising, watching mixed martial arts, and spending time with his two young children. He lives in Danville, California. John and I discussed a variety of topics, the first of which was the professional baseball initiation process. You'll notice from John's bio that even though he was drafted in 2002, he didn't play his first major league game until 2008. That length of time from being drafted to playing the major leagues is not uncommon, and I think you'll find that process fascinating when you hear John talk about his experiences. We also discussed John's responsibility as the mental skills coordinator for the Chicago Cubs. This is a position that's multidisciplinary and suits John very well based on some of his professional experiences and critical thinking ability. We talked about some of the insight that John has gained as a coordinator that he wished he'd had as a player. So John is somebody now who works hand in hand with the coaching staff and the front office in the Cubs organization. And now that he's more privy to some of the inner workings of the organization at the highest level, he can appreciate some of the things that he didn't appreciate while he was still playing. We discussed the role of analytics in baseball, particularly with regard to talent acquisition. A lot of the analytics and sports science work that we often see tends to focus on physiological parameters that don't necessarily have a lot of correlation to tactical preparation or output on the field. I think baseball is unique with regard to how they use analytics in a way that has much more carryover to the game. And John talks at great length about this phenomenon. We also talked about how to improve focus and concentration through things like meditation. And we closed by talking about how John maintains his competitive edge since retiring from Major League Baseball. Hey, John, thanks so much for taking the time to come on. I wanted to start by asking you a little bit about your experience in pro baseball. Baseball is unique in that there's kind of like almost, in some cases, up to a 10-year initiation process between the time that an athlete gets drafted and the time that he ends up in the big leagues. Whereas in sports like basketball or football, people typically get drafted out of college or sometimes out of high school. But if they're going to play at the highest level, they're pretty much going to know the resolution in a couple of years. You had a pretty long initiation process yourself, and I don't think people appreciate how difficult and arduous that journey can be, especially in a sport like baseball. So can you start by talking a little bit about that experience?
Well, I think baseball is wonderful as kind of a metaphor for life, because there is so much failure and there's so much just like you're saying, like it's a grind to go through. I could paint a picture really briefly of what life is like in the minor leagues, but for my first year in professional baseball, I was playing in Vancouver, British Columbia. The short season team for the A's. We were the Vancouver Canadians. And I think we made $850 a month. And that money we had to use to feed ourselves and pay for our rent. And we had to become responsible adults at that point. And most of us, we had the ages were anywhere at that time from, 18 to 21 on that team. So we had kids basically trying to figure out how to be an adult in a foreign country with limited funds. And it kind of starts like that, and it just keeps going. You travel to, I've been to almost I feel like I've been to almost every small town across the United States. I lived in Midland, Texas for a couple years playing baseball, to Kane County, Illinois, Jupiter, Florida. And then you go through all those different leagues and you kind of see a different view of the United States than what we normally, I guess, see on TV, or people that don't get a chance to go out and go to all those little small places. So you go through that. But again, it's a bunch of people chasing dreams. And so even though it might sound a little bit negative at first and it might sound low, I think that's the cost that's the price that you pay for trying to do something so hard. I think it's 3% of high school baseball makes it to college, and the same number makes it to professional baseball, and then the same number of that makes it to the big leagues, and then the same number of that plays more than 2 or 3 years. The odds are super low, but in that striving for low odds, I think you really develop a strong brotherhood. So while times might be tough and things are difficult, and it can take a long time to develop a swing, and you have to wait on opportunity, you have to wait on people getting injured, and baseball's not as physically a dependent game as basketball or football, where, in football, if your physical skills deteriorate and you can't run as fast as you used to run, or you can't push people around like you used to, like, you're going to get replaced. In baseball, the skills that you develop, I guess, over a long period of time, they tend to have a longer shelf life. So because of that, the people at the top can kind of clog the stream, and you have to wait. And I found myself at one point in my career honestly waiting for somebody to get hurt. And it's a weird place to be when you have the kind of mind that recognizes those things. It's a weird place to be thinking about, man, if that person goes down or gets hit by a ball in the right way, then I finally get my opportunity. And so you have to weigh and balance all those things and deal with tremendous amounts of failure. Like I said, a 30% success rate as a hitter is a Hall of Fame career in the major leagues. And I don't know that there's any job where 30% is good enough, but baseball, that's the sign of a great player.
Yeah, I mean, obviously you can't speak for every professional baseball player, but in your experience, like, was there ever a point at which, let's say you were in the minors for 4+ years, where you were like, how did you know that if you kept chasing that dream that you were going to make it? How do people make the decision where they've been doing it for 5 years or more in the minors? And some guys, might make it in 8 years. So how do people go about making that decision? Because do you chase the dream forever until the team says, okay, like, you're totally done and no one's going to sign you anymore? Is it a decision you make, or is it something where it's just obvious from teams not wanting to sign somebody that, okay, like, this is finally over now?
Well, I think as far as minor leaguers that, might not get to the big leagues, or in my case, I can give you my personal experience, and that is that I never thought that far ahead, because thinking that far ahead about, we always hear, I think one of the adages or cliches about sports that they always want to tell us, or all the life advice that you always want to hear that everyone tells you is, control the things that you can control, right? Like that we get drilled that into our brains so many times in baseball, because you don't get to pick which team you're going to be on. You don't get to pick which city you're going to live in. And for 6 years in the minor leagues, you don't even get to negotiate how much money you make. I mean, I think the maximum you can make throughout a six-year contract is maybe like $3,300 a month by the end of it, if you have 5 or 6 years of tenure. So you make $16,000 a year. You don't get a choice in any of that. And what I realized really quickly was that any amount of energy that I wasted focusing on, where I was going to be or what was going to happen, that was energy that I wasn't spending on working on what I was trying to get better at. And so I focused so much on my skills, on my body, what I ate, how I trained, because I didn't want to waste any sort of opportunity. I wanted to be able to walk away. And I think maybe this will answer your question too. I always wanted to, if I had never made it to the big leagues, I would have been okay, because I could have looked back on what I did and say, with the information that I had, there's nothing else I could have done. And then that kind of took it out of my hands, I think. And the second part of that was that I always thought, like you said earlier, I always thought, I'm going to play until I don't have a uniform. One day they're going to say, and it happens to everybody. Most people don't go out with some sort of a press conference, like the top 1% of the 1%, where they're going to retire and they have to throw a party. The media has to throw them a party when they're leaving. Most people just don't get a job offer anymore, and they got to figure out something else to do. And even though I played in the big leagues, that's basically what happened to me. And once my career ended, I became too expensive because of my major league experience. And you could give my job to somebody that was going to make the major league minimum, that was going to do it as well or better than me. And I when I was done playing, there was some holes in my life that I had to fill, but I look back on it and I'm very thankful that I approached it the way I did, because when I look back, even through the negative times, even through the big obstacles that popped up and the difficulties, I was doing the best that I could with the information I had. So I enjoyed that grind. I enjoyed those long odds. I think that when you're a kid growing up, you're 18, 19, 20, you're looking for a dragon to go slay, and making it to the big leagues that's a pretty difficult mountain to climb and monster to fight at the end.
Yeah, if you're not familiar with what that process entails, it's very easy on the outside looking in to be critical of players during like a contract negotiation, let's say, where it's like, why is this guy haggling over a couple extra $1 million when he's going to be making, signing a $20 million plus dollar contract anyway? But when you know what people went through to get to that point, it makes a lot more sense, because most of these careers, like you said, end so unceremoniously, and people are so expendable when they are minor leaguers that it's kind of like payback time. So you guys deserve whatever you get in those negotiations, especially in baseball where you endured so much to get there. So you had a career that lasted over a decade in professional baseball, and now if I'm saying it properly, your title is you're the mental skills coordinator for the Chicago Cubs. So can you talk a little bit about what that job title entails and maybe how it differs from something like sports psychology or clinical psychology? Because I think most people are familiar with sports psychology, but Major League Baseball, if I'm not mistaken, is one of the only major sports that actually labels these types of services as mental skills as opposed to more of a clinical domain. So can you talk about that a little bit, please?
Yeah, sure. So we have kind of a 4-part program, and I think that one of the things that our organization has been smart enough to realize is that you can bring in renowned sports psychologists. You could bring in people that are much smarter than me, with way more experience in different fields. But you need people from within the group. You need people that have kind of gone through the same things, because a lot of times when it comes to the sports, like the director of our program is a master's in sports psychology, worked at the IMG center down there in Florida for a long time. That's where he kind of did his thing. He worked with all different athletes. But what I serve for him a lot of times is I'm kind of his translator. I can read the same stuff as him, and we can have discussions about it, and he can present to our players. And then there's often times where I can go in and apply it a little bit more directly to what it means to a baseball player. When we talk about things like the growth mindset or visualization or, all the standard sports psychology practices that are out there, positive phrases. I mean, the things that I think not difficult to even find with a Google search. These things are all, backed and proven by scientific research, and they're important things to learn. But the way baseball works, sometimes talking to a psychologist might be looked at as we're still backwards, right? So it might be looked at as or weakness, right? Like if I'm asking for help. But if we're repackaging it more as a skills that we can practice, things that we can practice, because we're a very routine oriented group. Guys have kind of strict regiments in the weight room, in the batting cage, on the field, off the field, with diet, sleep study, wellness surveys. Like, we're very comprehensive in our programs for taking care of people. And so repackaging it with the name mental skills, I think, makes more sense, because they can look at it as, these are a menu of, they're offering us a menu of options that we can try and apply to our game and construct our own routine. So we have a kind of a fundamental educational program that we do with our youngest players when they first come in. And then we reinforce those same presentations a few times a year with them. So we'll see them in spring training. We'll go visit them on site while they're playing, and then they're usually back at some point in the winter, and we go through the same things again. So we have education. We have minor league mentorship, which is, it's really important, because I've been through the same things that all of these guys are going through, whether it be playing in a foreign country. I spent a few months playing in the Dominican Republic, or whether it be, having a catastrophic injury. I had a complete elbow reconstruction that made me miss 18 months and came back and played after that, passed over, sent down, told you weren't good enough, traded, all these things I've experienced. So I can help our minor league players that are going through similar things. Like, and I don't come at it from a position of authority either. I come at it like I'm your older friend that went through the same things, and here's what helped me and here's what didn't help me, but here are a couple things that you can try. And when I offer it up that way, not that my idea is the best idea, but hey, here's a couple things that I learned about since I'm not playing anymore and I have more free time. Maybe one of these things might help you out. That seems to be the best method of delivery, or the way to handle people like that. And then we have a major league program too. And our major league program, truthfully, we end up being a complaint sponge a lot for those guys. But those guys, by the time they get there, to make it and stay at that level, you already have to be pretty mentally tough, and you have to have the right kind of routines. And their burdens are different ones. They're facing the burden of massive fame and what to do with a lot of money. And in my experience in baseball, a lot of the guys that make the most amount of money, that had the best careers, those guys tend to be pretty unhappy a lot. And there's a funny thing about that. I've always thought that with great paycheck comes great responsibility to the city. And a city like Chicago can be really tough on somebody who's not playing well. So that's the third part. And then the last part that we do is we're trying to combat this massive wave of technological influences on human beings and get people to unplug a little bit more. And as part of that, we have a really comprehensive mindfulness program that we also run, where we lead guided meditations. We expose our players to different forms of meditation with the idea that whatever they can take away from that experience and whatever they can build into their routine is going to be helpful. And when you talk about mindfulness, it's very popular. Now it's it's kind of like the buzzword. You look at all the corporations are Google and Facebook and Twitter. All these big companies that you hear about are now instituting mindfulness programs. I think it's even hit the evil empire of like Goldman Sachs at this point. But I look at it much more as, we learned about compartmentalization when I was a young player, and you just have to learn how to be where your feet are. Like what you're doing is the only thing you're doing. That's what being mindful means. When you're eating, you're eating. When you're talking, you're talking. When you're hitting in the batting cage, you're practicing your skills. And so giving guys moments to recognize that ahead of time, like, hey, take a minute before you go into the cage, take 7 deep breaths, and then use your mind like a flashlight to scan your body and start making these connections. I mean, and this stuff is all supported by the scientific literature as well. So, we are trying to introduce it and repackage it in a way that players can kind of accept and add into, and I guess destigmatize it for our demographic. Because, man, if you would have told somebody 6 or 7 years ago what you need to do is meditate, like you would have been laughed at, one, and two, they would have started asking if we were going to bring a monk in orange robes that was going to meditate on top of a mountain. Like that's what a lot of our population has seen, and we've been really doing a lot of work to kind of break that stigma and show our guys that this is something that doesn't cost any money, that you can do on your own time, that doesn't take more than 5 minutes a day, that has all these benefits and is going to help you as a baseball player.
Yeah, I like the distinction that you made between the minor league level and the major league level, because you would think that people who make it to the major leagues have already kind of been selected for some of these mental skills, and where you can make the biggest difference probably is at the developmental level. And not that we've really talked too much prior to this conversation, but I mean, from the little that I know about you, you've got a very analytical and curious mind. So now, having described that position, it kind of makes sense why you gravitated towards it. It seems like a very multidisciplinary position, one that, it's very hard to set up like a formal curriculum for. You can't just go to school and learn all these different things. So what have you done, or what are you doing to kind of prepare yourself for this position and make yourself as useful to the organization as you can? Because it seems like it just crosses so many different domains, and it's like an endless pursuit of knowledge, I guess.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's why I enjoy it so much too, truthfully. When I went back to school last year to finish my degree, I switched my major to liberal studies, which was basically interdisciplinary study. So I approached academia from a bunch of different angles, and then tried to figure out how all these things work together, because I recognized that my job was going to be somewhat like this, or it was starting to develop into something like this, is that we have, we're pulling things from sports science, We're pulling things from the analytics department, but then we're also pulling things from academic literature. And then what we keep finding, which is crazy, and it still blows my mind, is that so much of what we always talk about when we come to applying to the players, a lot of it comes from Eastern philosophy. Like, it's shocking the amount of Buddhism that is involved in sports psychology, or at least, in my opinion, like performance psychology for people that have to go through kind of pressurized situations with other people watching them and perform a difficult task. I mean, that's common to lots of different endeavors, whether it be like we were talking before the podcast, but like the WWE is a similar situation where there's this very difficult performance that they have to do. And baseball is the same way, and it's night in and night out all the time. So we have all these different ways of looking at things, and that's how I tried to prepare for it, was choosing an interdisciplinary major. And my plan is I'm going to start graduate school in August in psychology. But I'm really hoping that I'm trying to partner and work with Arizona State to develop more of an interdisciplinary master's program like this that understands that when you're supporting an athlete or a professional athlete or somebody that's trying to do something that's difficult, generally, when you're part of that support system, it can't just be from one bucket. There is no one answer, because, not only do we have all sorts of different American personalities, but we have people from all over the world and different parts of the world with different levels of education that we have to be able to get messages across to, that we have to be able to find the best way to help them. And so, it's difficult. It's kind of a massive in scope, but at the same time, it's really fun. And like I said, it's just crazy how much Eastern philosophy that you start to find, or Buddhist philosophy, basically, when you start to talk about how you should feel about yourself and your performance.
Yeah, and then I'm curious, because oftentimes a lot of teams, when they hear, okay, so-and-so has a mental skills program, every other team kind of hops on board, especially if it's a successful team like the Cubs. But oftentimes what we see is whoever's, from a leadership standpoint, managing these organizations, they do it because everybody else is doing it, but they don't really value it. But I feel like for what you're doing, because it's so expansive in scope, at some point you have to communicate what you found with the front office. So how do you coordinate, integrate, the services that you provide with some of the decisions that the front office is making? Because I would imagine that in order for it to work well, it should be a pretty seamless relationship between what you guys are doing and then, what the coaches are doing and then the front office is doing, because, again, you're trying to solve a lot of the same problems. So how do you guys go about ensuring that, effective communication as an organization?
Well, in my case, I write my reports in kind of like a narrative form for them, because I understand, like, I couldn't possibly summarize, my interaction with somebody in like 3 sentences in an Excel report. Yeah. So I've got to write a little bit more extensively. But I'm really fortunate to work for a leadership group. Last year and we're coming up again on January, but every January we have Cubs Convention, which is like the big fan fest before the season starts. And our main boss, Theo Epstein, who's been, the architect of 2 curse-breaking franchises, right? He won the World Series in Boston, won the World Series in Chicago. He built those teams and the developmental systems. And he was on stage for the thing, and they were asking him, they were doing like the Newlywed Game with him and Jed Hoyer, who's our general manager, and they've worked together for years. And they asked Jed, what is Theo's superpower? And he got it right. And Theo's superpower was he said, I don't get embarrassed. And that's the kind of the culture that we have. Like, no question is embarrassing. Even if you're the lowest person on the totem pole, when it comes to, group meetings, or everyone listens, like, with an open mind to everybody. And everybody's not afraid to say what they want to say in any sort of an email or phone conversation or person-to-person interaction. And if you see something and you think that something needs to be changed, like, it's our responsibility to raise those questions. And the reason that it works is because the people at the top, they listen. And I think it's because, too, a lot of our organization is hired people first, like job second. For example, when I got hired, it was with like a question mark as a job title the first year. I was assistant to baseball operations, but I got to go around and kind of check out every single department that we had and figure out where I fit in best. And the second year is when I really started my work. I had, basically almost like an internship, I guess, where I got to look at the organization and do a month in pro scouting, do a month in amateur scouting, do a month in baseball operations in the front office, take a couple trips with the mental skills people, and go down to the Dominican and do some international scouting. And so being able to see all those things and see where I fit in. But looking back on that, what I realized is that I was hired just as a person, with the idea that, hey, this person can help the organization. And a lot of us are like that. A lot of us here are like that. And so because of that, people sometimes don't know about something that's going on at all. But those questions are never looked at as stupid here. They're always looked at as like, well, what can we learn from this? Because a lot of times when you have the same kind of experts evaluating the same information, what I find is that the answers tend to be like something that they already had been through in the past. But when you bring somebody in that maybe knows nothing about it but is interested in it, they'll ask questions sometimes, and then you look at those questions, and those questions are so valuable because you're like, man, why didn't we think of that? Well, we didn't think of that because of the bias of our expertise when it comes to baseball. We're looking at something, so we need different ideas, and because of that, I think that's why it flows so smoothly, up and down. And also, there are things that I would never tell the people at the top of the front office. There's personal and confidential things that players have told me that they would never make it out of. They'll never make it out of that conversation. And when the players know that I'm kind of this non-judgmental advocate that doesn't supply everything back to them, like they're very comfortable telling me some of the deepest stuff, and I really appreciate those moments. Those are truthfully my favorite. My favorite times in my career is when I have somebody that's younger than me, or even if it's a peer that is still playing in the major leagues, like really open up about something that's deep and emotional to them. And that gives me, I get so excited because now I can really it really directs me in different paths of like, okay, what can I go read? What can I go learn about? Who can I talk to give an answer back to this person from this question, or to try to provide them with something that's going to help them out through this difficult situation. And that to me is the most valuable work that I get to do.
That's really cool. It sounds like the organization that you work for is really more concerned about just hiring good people who can help solve problems, and the job titles are more arbitrary, and you have this very fluid leadership hierarchy. I mean, there's certainly times where you need to have that top-down approach, but it sounds like you guys are really value just good ideas above all else. And it might sound so obvious, but I mean, as you know, it's so rare that this actually occurs, even at the highest level of sport, highest level of the military, highest level of business. So, yeah, it's pretty. I mean, I think that if most of us worked in that kind of environment, we were talking offline and you were like, yeah, I feel like I've never worked a day in my life. I think it makes it much easier to go to work when you work in that kind of a situation. So what, with that stuff in mind, what insight do you think that you've gained now as kind of, working as a mentor or a coach and having a lot of interaction with the front office that you wish you would have had when you were a player?
I mean, truthfully, I really wish that I would have learned more about meditation first. Like that would have been a wonderful thing for me. I would have incorporated that, but I just didn't even go out of my way to explain. I mean, I read stuff like Eckhart Tolle books and all that, but I never committed to like a full-time practice until I was done. I mean, that's one thing that I wish I would have learned about ahead of time. I also wish that I would have known how much, and at least I don't know that this is indicative of every organization, but working here and being in a players first organization, I had no idea how much thought and care went into like player plans and, we have these comprehensive player plans for every person in the organization, where we spend a lot of time trying to figure out like how they need to practice, what they need to do to improve. And you're bringing all sorts of different people in on these, from the people from research and development that are looking at a bunch of physics data on how balls are coming off bats or how much balls are spinning, to these highly specialized skill coaches, to scouts that have seen thousands upon thousands of guys play, to people like me. And there's these long meetings about what's the best path for this person to take, and I had no idea how much these guys cared. And our developmental staff that we have here is amazing. They spend that's their life, is how can we craft practice for these guys so that they can make it to the big leagues, and we generally don't even care if they make it to the big leagues with the Cubs, just that they make it, period. So that's one thing I wish I would have known, because I always thought that there was more of an adversarial relationship between front office and player. I was never, the superstar player that the GM wanted to be friends with, and those guys do exist. I was always somebody kind of battling to be on a roster, and so I think when you're in that position, most of the time, what you feel a lot is like passed over. You feel like those people are callous and they don't care. I had no idea. And that's one thing that I've learned being on this side. I'm like, man, here's a good example of this story is that, when I played for the Mariners, my last year playing baseball, they gave us these watches that were going to track our sleep. Right. And so I get this thing and like, hey, we're going to put this on, you take it home and you sleep and we'll give you a sleep report. And I'm like, is there a GPS in this? I'm like, why would you ask that? I'm like, well, I mean,
you would ask that knowing you. Yeah.
I'm like, when I leave work, I'm going home, right? Like, what, is there a camera too? Like, you want to put a camera in my bedroom? Like, what else do you want to do? You want to know how many times I wake up in the middle of the night? Like, what are you guys using this for? Like, that's how I thought about it as a player. Then I get to the Cubs organization and I'm working on the other side. And I come to find out that like, they're really just trying to help the players. Like there's no decisions are being made on the Ready Band sleep study on who we're going to keep and who we're not going to keep. What the decisions that are being made are like, let's bring this person in and talk to them about their sleeping habits because we think it might benefit not just their career, but their life. Like these are things that we know help people feel better. And if we can use them in a positive way, we're going to use them. And I think that like I was always, I guess I had a lot of distrust for that kind of stuff as a player. And I guess I wish I would have been a little bit more open to just accepting it as, okay, let me try it and not being so skeptical, I guess, in a negative way. That's one thing that I wish.
Right. But I don't think you'll ever be a Kool-Aid drinker. But you've talked a lot about meditation. So if you could go back 10 years and incorporate meditation into your preparation as an athlete, how would you do it? Is it one of those things where it doesn't really matter when you do it, or do you go and you meditate and then maybe before the game you can't obviously lay down on your back and close your eyes when you're in the batter's box or in the on deck circle, but is it kind of a more of a continuum where you have this meditation practice and then you learn how to incorporate that right before you get in the batter's box, or is it just this abstract thing where you can have your meditation practice, keep it totally detached from baseball, and it somehow carries over onto the field? How do you guys utilize that?
Well, I mean, a couple different ways. Like we were talking about a body scan. Like the idea of if you stand still and close your eyes, standing up, and use your mind like a flashlight to feel your body, like the science shows that you're building a better connection between body and mind, and there may be a slight increase in proprioception right after that. Plus the idea of, like we were talking about, of compartmentalizing ourselves into the different moments of the day. Like if I take time to stop for a second and follow my breath or just express some sort of single pointed focus before I go try to do something really difficult, I'm going to be more there. That's one part of it. So that kind of the physical practice of it. But the second one is that, being on a field in front of a lot of other people is already stressful, and trying to do things that are difficult physically under stress, as an example, hit a baseball, it's really hard. I mean, some people say it's the hardest thing in sports. I don't know because I haven't played the other sports, but I know that's pretty damn hard because I tried for a long time to be really good at it, and I had limited success. I feel like over my whole life of trying to hit a baseball, but there's moments where we kind of get overwhelmed, and I saw it happen a lot to young players when I was playing. Like when your guys are walking out onto the field in Dodger Stadium and they look up and they see that there's 5 decks behind home plate or 4 decks and there's 55,000 people there. And that can be intimidating. And you start to feel, physical symptoms of stress in your stomach. Some people call it butterflies, or then you might start telling yourself stories. Your mind starts running wild. Your palms get sweaty. Like those are real states that we're in. And the key in those moments, at least for me, was to reframe those as positive. Like, oh, these are the physical signals my body's giving me to tell me that I'm where I'm supposed to be. And that's what I thought as a player all the time. Every time I felt those feelings, I always thought, good. This is good. This is why I practice so much. So I had the opportunity to feel like this, because not many people get to do it on this level. They don't get to feel like this on this level. But what a mindfulness meditation practice adds to that is that if you're, and practice is defined as, you set an intention, you sit down and set an intention to think about one thing. Inevitably, you are going to be distracted. Like there's no doubt about it. You're going to get distracted. We say 800 to 1,000 words a minute in our head. the key is learning how to recognize when we're distracted from what we want to do. So you set an intention, inevitably you're distracted. You recognize the attention, you recognize that distraction, and then you just reorient your attention back to what you wanted to do. Like that kind of nuts and bolts practical approach to focus and concentration, like never more is the human race needed in it than right now, when our attention span is lowered because we have these really exciting phones that we can look at, and I still get trapped in them and just stare at it for like 15 minutes. But real life is not as exciting or as stimulating, right? And so we have the less of ability to concentrate. We have a shorter attention span. It's easier for us to get distracted. No one's ever lived in a more distracting time, right? With movies and billboards and Snapchat, like there's just so much stuff going on. So to try to recultivate that and develop that idea of single-pointed focus and extend our concentration or our attention span, basically, so that we can modulate our attention and put it to what we want to put it on. So when we go back and we talk about that guy who's standing there in the on-deck circle with the butterflies going through his stomach and his mind is kind of racing, he now has practice going back to what he intends to do. And I think it's really important to practice those things without stress, so that when we are in stressful situations, we have some experience going back to what it is that we need to do. Because if you're hitting, there's not a lot of things you can think about. You can't honestly weigh that 59% of the time this reliever throws backdoor cutters and 2-1 counts to left-handed hitters after the 7th inning. Like, you can't really remember that, and it's not going to help you. You have to go up there with very simple things in your mind. Like I would think of things like up, as in like I needed to see the ball up if I was going to swing, or think about things like trying to time the start of my swing with, or the start of my like whole move, right, to hit the ball with something that the pitcher was doing, so that I was on time when it was my turn to react. But there is no time to think about any of those things. And if your mind is racing and running, I mean, it's why they talk about like a lot of states have texting and driving rules, right? Or you're not supposed to hold the cell phone while you're driving. That's because when we're talking or we're thinking words in our head, I heard from a eye doctor a long time ago down in Southern California, a guy named Bill Harrison, who's worked with everybody from George Brett to Barry Bonds to the Giambi brothers. Been in baseball a long time. He was a Cal eye doctor, and he was saying the same part of our brain that controls like that internal monologue also is associated with our visual cortex. So if we're thinking, we're not seeing as well as we could be seeing, and that's why you can't talk on the phone while you're driving the car. Hold it up, because that's why you drive right by the exit. Not that you didn't see it, you just didn't recognize that you saw it. And I always took that to heart as a player. And then learning about this stuff now, I'm like, oh man, like why don't we we have to figure out a way to work on modulating our attention. So I don't even think of it necessarily as meditation. That's kind of the general term. I think of it more as a concentration exercise. Yeah. Like how well can I focus on this? And it's something that I've given to my children as part of their daily routine. It's something that I almost practice it religiously at this point, a couple times a day, and it doesn't even take very long. It's 5 minutes for me. 5 minutes, sometimes in the morning, 10 or 15 minutes if I'm feeling froggy. Just sitting completely still and listening to nothing and letting your mind go. And a lot of times too, when I'm trying to focus on that one thing, what starts to pop up, but all the things that I'm really concerned about or I'm worried about or I'm grateful for, and like those things kind of keep recycling through. And then when I get done with that, I don't feel like I'm have some sort of plan. I just feel like I'm a little bit ahead at that point. Like I've already worked out those things. Like now I know exactly what I need to do, and I have practice when I do get distracted by my phone, by the TV goes off, there's a big bang on the wall, something. Right? I can go back faster to what it is that I'm doing right now. And like I said, it applies to the field, it applies to regular life, and I think it's an important thing that all people should at least investigate. It might not be the answer for everybody. I don't think it's the answer to anything. It's just a practice. But taking the time to commit to a practice for a while and investigate it and see how it makes you feel, like, don't trust me or don't trust the scientific literature. Like, you should trust how you feel. And I think that's another part of my job too, right? Is that not all this stuff works for everybody. I mean, shockingly, it's true. Like weight room exercises work different for different people. And the point of trying to improve at something is really, really taking the time to learn and notice what works best for you. And this is something that I would have, had I been introduced to it in this way while I was playing, I probably would have been I would have been that guy in the orange robe on top of the mountain by the end of it.
That's a really cool explanation, and it kind of ties in nicely with what you said earlier, where a lot of the things that influence your practice have been around for a very long time. Some of these Eastern breathing disciplines and meditation, but now that we're able to quantify it and validate the effectiveness of it, now it's kind of come full circle. Now we're starting to, these things are much more common. Now, what's much newer that you guys are using with the Cubs is the analytics. And so I think baseball is one of the first sports to really use analytics well to help influence decision making. And I think that your organization is even at the forefront of the analytics movement within baseball. So without obviously getting into too much of the proprietary stuff that you guys might do, what unique actionable information do you gather from analytics that you couldn't just get by looking at somebody with the naked eye? There's always this kind of this false dichotomy between, the sports science and the art of coaching, and I think they're more complementary. But where do you think the analytics are really valuable, especially in terms of quantifying tactical performance in baseball?
Well, I mean, I think they're most valuable in kind of like acquisitions of players because, what we're trying to do. I mean, it's pretty easy if you watch a lot of baseball games to point out who the best people are. You look at like just some basic information, like how hard does he throw? And they go, oh, well, he throws 104. And you go, okay, fine. Like that's perfect. Like that's not a difficult thing to figure out, but it's in finding the outliers. And I think that was really what was exposed by, Billy Beane and Michael Lewis in Moneyball in the 2003, I think that book came out. And that was the draft class that I was part of. I was part of the Moneyball draft class by the Oakland A's. And so what you found in there was that they realized that, you could take these Harvard statisticians and you could hand them all this baseball information and they could find people that they figured out which statistics mattered more at the time, like slugging percentage, for example, or on base percentage was more valuable than slugging percentage financially. They were trying to quantify statistics into money and how much is this worth to our team, right? How much is this worth to our team? And that's where WAR comes from, right? Like how much this player is worth 11 wins above just an average major leaguer. If you put him on the field, how much is 11 wins worth to a major league team? That's a good way of figuring out how much you should pay somebody. And if you look at WAR and you compare it to how much teams actually make and what the players make, those guys that are high WAR players, those guys should generally be making, some of those guys should make $60 or $70 million a year if you actually went by that statistic, and they don't, because I guess that's not fair to everybody else. But that's kind of where it started. But now where I'm most interested in is when we have all this tracking information now. There's all the stadiums have Doppler radar systems in them called TrackMan, and they have all this different ways of evaluating the physics. And what we find is that you find these outliers. Like you see some superstar player, and everybody has. I think all the teams have this, but you have their the data on what their breaking ball looks like in numbers, and you might be able to find that same breaking ball from some kid who's in A-ball with the Pittsburgh Pirates, and you notice, okay, this kid doesn't have good statistics, but this one pitch seems to be exactly the same as Craig Kimbrell's breaking ball on the Red Sox, right? So let's go put eyes on that person and see what they look like, and then the scouts will go see them in person, and they'll say, okay, here's what the issue is, and then you send some sort of like a coaching specialist out there and say, is this a correctable issue? And then they'll see that, and then next thing you know, that player gets traded to a different organization for cash considerations, and then 3 years later, that guy's a really good player in the big leagues that nobody thought, none of the baseball people seeing it recognized it because they couldn't. They didn't realize that because the performance wasn't matching up to the like the physics data, and that's where I find it really interesting when we see stuff like that. But further too, the data like that too has changed the tactical approach on the field. Balls get thrown in different places because of the information that we have. Then we used to just go by kind of like, you'd watch the game of this guy hit that and he hit this and he hit that. But then you find out that there's certain things that people don't react to, or there's certain arm slots that people can't see. And it's a further deeper dive into the information. But if you have smart people that can recognize those things and spot those trends, then those become, I think, actionable. That becomes actionable information. That becomes something that you can use on the field, with the caveat that you have to execute it. And I think that's the other part. That's where mental skills really comes in. But that's where kind of practice and preparation and teammates. When you're talking about, calling a game, for example, as a catcher, like, yeah, you have all the information on who's doing well on the other team, who seems to be seeing the ball better at the moment, what the historical information tells you, what the R&D department suggests, what the pitching coach suggests, but you also have to weigh that against what that person can do right now in the moment and what the pitch before looked like, because even if he didn't execute, there might be something that comes off of that is difficult to see physically to the human eye. Like a good example of this, and this is getting really technical into baseball, but a good example of this is, pitchers throwing two pitches that look very similar but moving different ways at the very end, right? There's different pitches. So a high fastball usually lends itself to a curveball afterwards, because a curveball is kind of top to bottom straight down. And if you can throw them out of the same plane, you have a better chance of somebody either swinging and missing or not swinging at it if it's a strike. And the same thing with the lower fastball and a slider. So you have to have people on the field that understand this and know through experience of actually playing the game what might look like something else afterwards. So even if the pitcher doesn't execute, you have something that you can go to off of that missed execution that can possibly trick the human eye. So you have all the information, but it has to be distilled down in a way where the catcher, I guess, mainly has to understand what's happening. And then on a broader extent with the coaching staff, they might know that this is the right matchup, like relief pitcher to bring in. But what the information doesn't know is how that guy's feeling, or if he's got a blister, or, his arm's a little bit sore and he's not telling anybody. Like, there's so much more human information that comes in to the on-field strategy that makes it really difficult for that information to kind of get all the way in. But it really plays a huge effect in, projecting guys to sign for a long period of time. Like I said, finding outliers that might have some upside that got overlooked. I mean, that's the A's for the rather part of the beginning of the 2000s were the best at that in baseball. They were finding people that were passed over, and they thought, oh, wow, look, this numbers line up like this. We think that's going to result in wins. And all of a sudden they're putting together a pretty competitive team on the cheap instead of doing the traditional thing like the Yankees, which is recognize who like the 10 best players in the world are and then just go get them.
That's one of the better explanations of sports science and analytics that I've heard. I'm interested, at least with you guys, because you can collect so much information, right? And we don't always know what information is useful and what's not. We have to have questions driving the gathering of information. Do you guys find that like you know what questions you want to ask, and then you try to find the data to help inform those questions? Or do you really, because there's so many ways that you can look at this information, maybe do you just collect a bunch of data and then say, okay, we're going to use the data to look for trends, and then maybe drive the questions based on the trends that we identify? Does that kind of make sense? So do you start with the question, or do you start with the data, or is it kind of a cycle that just goes back and forth?
I think it goes back and forth.
Okay.
And that requires like the right kind of environment, because, when you take somebody who's a statistician or data analyst and they come into, like, walking into a locker room is super intimidating for that part of the population generally. Like it's not the same like type of people. I don't know if is that, I don't want to be,
I understand what you're saying. Yeah.
It's totally different,
yeah.
Interests generally. So again, that's where I feel like I learn the most about baseball is from the people like that, because they come in, they say, hey, look, here's all the, we built this and we think this. And I'm like, that sounds ridiculous. And then I start to think about it, and then you start to look at it, and they kind of, they show you, and then, well, let's try it and apply it on the field. And then maybe it works, maybe it doesn't work. But you have to have the environment where you're willing to test stuff like that. And it happens the other way too, like people that are kind of have come up and have all this baseball experience. They can ask questions. Hey, I always heard this. Is that true? Or what about trying to line something like this up? Does that make sense? And they can bounce those ideas. And I think the ideas get bounced back and forth in that way. Like, and I've definitely done that with stuff with catching with our group, where I've gone and asked them questions like, hey, I think this might be something, like, hey, what do you guys think? And then they'll do their stuff, and they've come back and said like, hey, we totally see what you're saying. Like, that makes sense. Or, you know what, we looked through all the stuff you were asking about, and it doesn't seem to line, like the data doesn't seem to line up with that idea. So, yeah, it goes back and forth, and I think that's the healthiest way to do it.
Yeah, and obviously you've got to have kind of an organizational culture that's conducive to that kind of back and forth, which it sounds like you have. So that's really neat. Now, I want to sort of close up by talking about, you mentioned that one of the appeals of being a professional baseball player was just that sense of purpose and that focus and almost that chase where, you mentioned earlier that you weren't even concerned with, or in the long term at least, what was going to happen to you. You were just focused on what you could do in the moment to prepare. And I would imagine that when your career finally came to an end, it was difficult to duplicate that sense of purpose. But it seems like you found another vehicle to do that. So can you talk about why you've gravitated towards Jiu Jitsu and kind of how that's helped to ignite some of those competitive fires that you still had as a player?
Yeah, well, I mean, I was definitely conditioned to compete all the time. I mean, 140 plus times a year in the minor leagues, 162 times a year in the major leagues, and then add spring training games in, and then add just, the competitive environment of being around other athletes that are trying to win. I mean, like, we played everything from video games to cards to like, I can hit that sign with this rock. I mean, like, there's just like, who can lift more weights, who can run faster, who can jump higher, like, who can make other people laugh. Like, that we competed so much. So when I got done playing, I came home and I stayed in shape I got released in the middle of the season in 2015, and I came home and I stayed in shape and I hit and stuff. But the kind of job opportunities that I was getting were not, like, I wasn't going to get to play, and that's what I needed to do. And so I started, it went from me kind of just going out and working out to me coming home going like, who wants to play Monopoly? Like, who wants to play who wants to play a game where I'm going to try to kill you in the game, like whatever we're playing, like, because I'm so used to, like, being on the edge of my seat and winning or losing, that I needed to find an outlet for I recognized right away, I'm like, this is not going to work, because number one, my wife's going to hate me, and like, how many times can you beat a 6-year-old at tic-tac-toe and be happy about it?
Right.
So I had actually already trained in 2006. I had a really good season and made the All-Star team in the minor leagues, and I didn't get called up, and I was really frustrated, and I recognized that I hadn't been in a fight, like a real fight in my life. So I joined a MMA gym in Pleasant Hill, California, Cesar Gracie Jiu Jitsu, and I did kickboxing 3 times a week, and I did Jiu Jitsu a couple times a week, but it was no-gi Jiu Jitsu. And I recognized right away when I did that in 2006 that this was something that I had to learn, because I was so uncomfortable. People are smashing my face and choking me and stuff, and I felt so helpless. And at the time I was a 20-something-year-old professional athlete that was, training all the time and lifting all the time. And I thought that, if I got in a fight, I'll just beat somebody up. No, God, no, I was so wrong. I was so embarrassed. And it also makes me think now, when I think about people that like get in fights in bars, I'm like, you didn't even practice once. You didn't practice once, and you're going to fight somebody in like the
totally right,
like,
man. Yeah.
Crazy. That'd be like me. Like, would you do that? What if instead of fighting, it was plumbing? Okay. What if that's how we settled all our debates, our drunken debates at the bar? It was like, because it might as well be the same thing. No one's going to do it well that has no training. So recognizing that, but no. So I realized that it was something that I wanted to learn. And when I stopped playing, like I said, about 6 weeks after Monopoly and staying in shape, I signed up at a gym, bought a gi, put a white belt on, and walked in and just got strangled over and over again by people like half my size. And I was so happy when I drove home. I was so happy. It was like the worry of like, am I going to get another job in baseball? Like, what's going to happen to us? Like, are my kids going to be okay? Like, all those worries, all those fears, for that 2 hours were gone. I mean, just totally gone, because I'm so aware of one thing on my body that hurts so much, or that I'm going to choke, that I have to tell you to stop. And I really recognized also how difficult and nuanced it is, and how much time it actually takes to get good at it. Like, you're not like, I've been at it 6 days a week for a couple of years now, and I don't even consider myself good at all. I mean, I'm only a blue belt. I know most people don't even make it to that, because people can't handle people smashing their face all in, or some giant guy putting his stomach on top of your head. It can be a bit uncomfortable, but recognizing how deep the ocean was when I first started swimming in it, and knowing that it'd be something really valuable to have and to master, and it really lit me up. And now I already have an addictive personality, and I'm totally addicted to that. My wife gets upset at me because kids will be asleep and she'll come in and she's like, "Are you watching YouTube? You watching Jiu Jitsu YouTube videos again? Like, you're about to be a 37-year-old man, and all you want to do is watch people choke each other and get better at it." So it's just a great avenue. And I really recommend. That's another thing that I recommend people do. Like we haven't evolved that much in 25,000 years. When we used to have real, like, actual physical stress. Man, that might be a tiger, or where am I going to get my next meal? I need to kill something to go get it. Or, I got to climb over this hill and it's going to take me a long time because I have no tools or anything. I mean, like, there was real stress, and our body has not, life has gotten so much better and easier for us but we have this need for stress. I'm reading Robert Sapolsky's Behave book. And,
so that's quite an undertaking.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
Like I get like 5 pages at a time, and like the margins are just full of notes. But I was just recently reading a part yesterday about stress and how it affects the brain, and they were talking. Now this was in rats, but they were just basically talking about how if a rat is scared, right, it produces this hormone at this exact same level, and it becomes like debilitating on the rat. Like, it loses short-term memory when this hormone comes out, right? But if the rat is on a wheel and it's running, it produces the same amount of the exact same hormone, and it goes to the same place, but it enhances the stuff. And that really resonated with me because I'm like, this makes so much sense. Like, we think stress is bad, and all my experience as a baseball player, where I'm standing there in like the most stressful moments of my life, like stomach churning, am I going to be okay? Like, millions of dollars are on the line. Is this the right decision? Like, am I prepared? Like, all those moments, like, that's when I was at my happiest. Like, those are the things that really stand out me, kind of, because I felt like I was right in the middle of like the fire, and all the stuff was real. And it was incredibly exciting, and we were on the same group, kind of pulling for the same thing. That we need it. We absolutely need it, And nowadays, because we don't have the same access to saber-toothed tigers that we used to, we get our stress from the stories that we tell ourselves in our head about Donald Trump and all these things that don't really directly affect us. We start worrying about what other people are thinking about the shoes that we chose that went with our outfit. Like, I definitely, when you're growing up, I used to think about that all the time. It's like we're all perpetual teenagers now, where we're focused so much on what everybody else thinks about us, and then telling ourselves stories to match that thing or to feed our ego or whatever. But it's all that anxiety and worry that's, Eric Fromm's Age of Anxiety that's come up, that despite all these resources that we have, better food, a better everything, right? Easier life, we're more depressed and more anxious and more freaked out than we've ever been. By 2031, the APA reports that 50% of the American working population is going to be at unmanageable levels of stress. And I think that stress is good. So if you choose to get it from somewhere and it's physical in nature, it's so freaking beneficial. And Jiu-Jitsu for that is like, I get to learn a martial art. I get to master something. It kind of makes me a badass. And it's a perfect outlet. I can go select the kind of stress that I want to have, and that's what I choose. And because of that, I notice how different I feel. Like, my wife will notice if I haven't, like, we go away for a couple of weeks or something, and it's hard for me to get onto the mat. Like, my personality changes. I get testier. I'm quicker to anger. I'm just not myself. And I looking back on my life the way I have, like, I always had so much stress that I was always so happy-go-lucky, and Jiu-Jitsu has just kind of filled that void for me, and I'm so thankful that, I found a mat.
That's really neat. I mean, you kind of joke and call it an addiction, but I'm sure you know plenty of people who, once they retired from professional sports, they found addictions that weren't as healthy. I know from people in the military that that I work with, it can be hard to go from something where you have such a tremendous sense of purpose, and now you're like, okay, what do I do? And the cool thing about jiu-jitsu or any kind of martial art is that there's like really no end to it. I mean, even as a baseball player, like, at a certain point, your technical skills, your bat speed, your arm strength deteriorate. But in jiu-jitsu, at least technically, you can keep getting better until the day that you die. Your physical skills might decline, but so that's the kind of thing where, if you have that kind of obsessive personality, it'll keep you occupied for a very long time. And you don't have to worry about finding anything else to master or to pursue if you don't really want to.
Yeah, you're right. And I think too, for like children, it's really beneficial because of the not confidence necessarily, but just like I don't know. I don't love a confidence model, especially when we're talking about kids, but like I notice it with my children, they get some of this stress and anxiety out, but then they're also kind of just more prepared for the rigors of the playground. They're more prepped. Like, we've had a situation with my 4-year-old where, they told us that, hey, there's a bunch of boys that are a bit crazy at the preschool that like run around crazy outside and like push kids over. And they're like, yeah, your daughter she's right in it, like against them. I'm like, what do you mean? Yeah, they come running over, like they shove her. She tackles them. She tackles them. Like she shoots a double leg on kids and sits on top of them. And, like what better thing could I give, especially in this bizarre time we live in now where all these stories are coming out about all these crazy stuff that men do.
Yeah.
I was so focused on hitting sliders that I had no idea people were like this. And fine. You know what? I'm a father of 2 daughters, and the best gift that I could give them is the ability to feel comfortable walking around by themselves and to feel like they could handle themselves physically and emotionally and mentally in any situation. I mean, that's what we really try to do at home. That's why like the meditation practice is important. That's why, we live our lives the way we do, but that's also for me, like it's mandatory. I'm like the psycho martial arts dad now, but it's mandatory that those kids train until they're 18. Like, I don't care. I don't care if you dislike it. You're going to do it. You're going to learn how to love it because it's something that I could give you. Well, introducing it to you, like they have to actually train and do it themselves, but it's something I can give them that I think will really benefit them in the future. And like nobody that does jiu-jitsu all the time ever has a bad thing to say about it other than like my neck hurts a little bit or my knees are sore, like they're always like, oh, I'm so thankful. Like you hear so often, all these stories and like you see rash guards and stuff out there. So many people say jiu-jitsu saved my life. So many people that I've come across, like life was going down a bad path. They found this, and yeah, you were talking about it earlier, but it becomes a positive addiction. And then because you're in this egoless environment where everybody knows who can strangle everybody else, that's exactly what it is. Like there's not a lot of there's no trash talking in the gym, or there's no like, oh, I got this person with this and I did this. Like that is so rare because every day you show up, you have to prove it. There's no speculation on who could win or who couldn't win because you just tried against each other and one person definitely did win, and you tap and you shake hands and you start over. And I just love that about it.
That's great. It probably in some ways beats up your body less than being a catcher did. Well, you've been really generous with your time. We're coming up on an hour. I wanted to give you a chance to just talk about where people can learn more about you and maybe some of the projects that you have coming up in the future.
Yeah, well, I mean, I have a Twitter. That's like my one social media outlet. That's not like I have a Facebook, but that's so I can find jiu-jitsu open mats. I don't recommend anybody going on that. It's not that exciting unless you want to see pictures of like my anniversary or something, But no, I have a Twitter at ManBearWolf. I'm a huge South Park fan, so I started that actually before I went to Iraq in 2010 to go visit troops with Armed Forces Entertainment. They had to start a Twitter, so I've had that for a long time, and you can find us there. But we're also Darnell McDonald and I, who's my partner at work. We are working on kind of starting a general public consulting business with these kind of same ideas. It's got kind of a crazy name. Honestly, it's Spot Yaya Sport. So it's not, we didn't choose the most marketable name, but Spot Yaya is like the Sanskrit for self-study. And I think that that's really what we're trying to teach. We're really trying to teach people that like the answers, there's answers out there in books and there's answers from other people, but really learning how to like look within and everything that you do, like whether it be food that you eat or books that you read, like, are they making this better? Like whatever you're trying to do, is it making it better? Like how often do you ask yourself the question, like, I heard it said like perfectly the other day, it was, what do you know that you're doing wrong that you could change? that you're not doing? Like when I ask myself that question, like so many things start popping up of all the stupid stuff that I do still to this day. And that's kind of our mission. It's not necessarily to do anything other than help people with a kind of systematic format of self-study, and then also introduce those ideas on a broader scale. And our goal is mainly to get into schools and really try to help this next generation that's growing up tethered to these smartphones, avenues away from technology. Like technology is fantastic. It enhances our life, but on a day-to-day basis, a lot of times I feel like the personal technology that we have may do more harm than good. And that's, I think, a worry of mine, especially as a father, like I said, of children and wanting to try to leave like a positive mark on the world before I leave. This is something that we really believe in, but I can spell that out. Svadhyaya is SVADHYAYA sport. And we should have that off the ground in January. We're doing a couple things in Chicago in January. But we want to try to do, like a light version of what we do for the Cubs for anybody else that's interested in it.
Well, that's very cool. I'll be sure to put that up in the notes, and I'd be interested in actually using that product myself. So looking forward to January. Well, thanks. Like I said, you've been really generous with your time, and enjoy the rest of your off season before that spring training grind starts up in February.
Man, I appreciate having you on, and I appreciate being able to come on and talk to you. We met at Leaders, and very fortunate to have met you.